What I'm constantly confused about with this story is, and you mentioned it before, that when Proctor first came along the Evans case, Reg Christie seems like the stand-up, respectable guy. But as you learn more, Christie also seems like he was an absolute weirdo and just kind of ghoulish and strange. But it seemed like two completely different people lived in Reg Christie. Was it a case of people were seeing what they wanted to see, or was he like a lot of serial killers where he could be a chameleon for wherever he was and whoever he was talking to?
There's a kind of dissociation about him. In his very long statement that he prepared for Harry Proctor, he confesses to most of the crimes almost casually. He says, "It must have been me." It's almost as if in his own mind there wasn't a dislocation between the highly moralistic, rather fastidious, disapproving man who the neighbours saw and the man who could gas, rape and strangle women he had lured to his house. In his own mind, these things seemed quite compatible. He'd sort of boast about how he didn't drink any spirits or go to pubs, or he didn't approve of prostitutes. It's very sort of chilling and eerie to read, to see that he could kind of own the crimes while also believing in himself as a morally upright figure. It's sort of weird disjunction looked at from the inside, but from his own perspective, these things were compatible. And that maybe tells you something about some weirdness in British society in the 1950s. He had almost Victorian attitudes that could extend to thinking it sort of almost acceptable to murder young women who were not of great value to society.
It really reminded me of Hallie Rubenhold's The Five, where you're talking about these victims, and basically the newspapers want to just be like, they must have been prostitutes. They got murdered at Reg Christie house. I guess they're just prostitutes. Was that just everywhere where kind of, this woman ended up in this situation, so clearly she was probably a sex worker. Was there just no fact-checking? Was it just not worth it for the newspapers to care?
Well, one of the women was a sort of full-time sex worker. She had a drink problem. She slept in a public lavatory near Paddington, but she was much loved by her friends, a very loyal and generous friend. The others were not. They worked as munitions workers in factories or as waitresses in cafes. One wanted to be a nurse. One wanted to be an artist. They were very various. But I suppose at the time, any young woman who was very short of money and living on the fringes of society in this very deprived part of West London might have traded sexual favours for money or for silk stockings or for a drink. These were pretty desperate lives. So to some extent, the category of sex worker is a bit blurry when you get to people who are this poor and women who were paid much less than men and were living really on the edge. And one of the few commodities they had, as it were their bodies. It was quite striking to read in the newspapers how they were described. They were seen as sort of lost girls, unfortunates, treated dismissively. Fryn Tennyson Jesse described them as murderees and as poor little tarts. And one of the pathologists who worked on the case described these kinds of women who got murdered as better off out of this world. So this sort of dehumanizing language, to my mind, linked up with the dehumanizing that Reg Christie carried out on them, that there was a sense in which they were types rather than individuals, representatives of something degraded in the country.